Hi there, my name is Toby, and today I'm continuing talking about Aether and the Shamanic Universe. Now these are my ideas, brand new ideas, and they're pretty far out, I kid you not. So if you think so far what I've been saying is far out crazy, we haven't even started yet. So today is going to be even more far out. But bear with me, there's a logic to this, and I think it makes sense. But of course, it's just my ideas, nothing else. So we're talking about the ether, the universe, and here's the thing, here's the basic premise that we always must come back to. The universe is only one, singular, and there's only one substance that makes up the universe, only one substance. That substance we're going to call ether. And there's only one substance, that means there's only one force. Only one force. And then that also means there is only one energy. Only one energy. One universe, one substance, one force, one energy. That's the basic premise. That's why this model of the universe is so simple. But this model must include consciousness and matter. So these are two different things. The only way this model will work is if this one substance, this one ether, has got different densities. So it's one pure fluid, and inside that fluid, there are different pressure densities. Again, I'm talking abstract here. I'm calling it a density. I'm calling it a fluid. But we don't know what it is. But whatever it is only one of it. And the universe starts off with consciousness. It has to begin at consciousness. But consciousness is metaphysics. Pure consciousness is not physical. We can also call this self-awareness. So we as souls have got a certain level of self-awareness, consciousness. And everything has got a different level of self-awareness. But the universe, we can think of the universe as infinite, primordial self-awareness. But that is not physical. There is no manifestation. You can think of this as the unconscious mind. It's unconscious. There's no space, no time, no experience. It's simply the potential. It's consciousness itself, a potential for consciousness. But this must appear, and it appears from a point outside space and time. It appears from the point, and it appears as very subtle, diffuse, dilute, thin ether. Thought energy. Thought energy. Now, this is the point of manifestation. Right there. We don't need to think about how this material world is created. No. We need to think about the very first thought. The very first thought. That is the point of creation. Because before the very first thought, there was only the unconscious mind. No space, no time. The very first thought means the creation of space and time. And the very first primordial thought of self-awareness is realization of yourself. Oh, I am. What do they say? I think, therefore I am. So the very first thought of this primordial self-awareness is I am. It must realize itself. Now remember, this is the highest level of self-awareness. Now we're only at a low level. We've got a certain amount of self-awareness. We're trying to get more and more self-awareness. Imagine infinite self-awareness. What would its very first thought be? I am. it would realize itself. It would realize I am infinite self-awareness. It would realize the geometry of infinity. It would realize that. It would realize, wow, I am an infinite sphere of consciousness. But the moment it had that thought is now taking place in time. Manifestation has happened. And that thought has imagined a geometry. But now you have imagined this infinite sphere, and you have imagined it in time. Therefore, it must be created. Okay, think about this. Or put it this way, the potential for its existence has been created. Because it will also realize that I am self-awareness. I am also an infinitesimal point. It will realize that too. It will say, wow, I am an infinite sphere of consciousness. And wow, I am an infinitesimal point of consciousness. And then it will realize, wow, between these two things, a space has been created. The moment you have visualized geometry, the potential for that geometry has been created. Now, the moment you start thinking about it, thought energy has been created. The ether has been created. But the ether is just this thought energy. Very diffuse. It just spreads out. And it will spread out between the potentials. The potential of this giant infinite sphere and this tiny infinitesimal sphere. That potential between these 2 points is a massive infinite potential. But within that geometry now, that potential can do things. There will be a movement between that. The ether is created, and it will have different densities. At the infinite sphere, low density. At the infinitesimal point, high density. Now, this is very deep. It's very deep, because look at it like this. Again, one substance, one force, and one energy. How does this work? Well, one substance has different pressures, different densities. That creates a dynamic. The dynamic we can call potential energy. Potential energy is created by geometry. Geometry. Let's look at this very simply in a battery. A battery is potential energy, and it has an anode and a cathode, and they are separated apart. They're two positions in geometry with a distance. There has to be space. Geometry. If the anode and the cathode came together, the energy would be released. There's no potential. In order for there to be a potential energy, there must be space. Geometry. So the fundamental potential of pure consciousness, infinite space and infinitesimal point, that is geometry. That is a distance now created. Therefore, that is a potential energy. Now, okay, there's a battery. Look at an elastic band. I stretch an elastic band. That has given it potential energy. I let go, it will return. But the potential energy is created by the geometry, me stretching the elastic band, pulling it apart. I've created a longer distance, that is space. So when I stretch an elastic band, I am creating space. It's relative space between the 2 points, the 2 ends of the elastic band, but I am creating that geometry. Geometry creates the potential energy. Then if I let go, that geometry will return. Now it's with gravity. Gravity is the same thing. If I lift something up in the air and let go, it falls down. When I lift it up away from the ground, I'm creating space, a distance between the object and the ground. Then when I let go, the object falls down to the ground. That space disappears again. I'm creating a potential energy by creating geometry, relative space between two objects. That is geometry, space. The same thing, space is geometry. And that is created by consciousness. Consciousness visualizes geometry. Before consciousness had any thoughts, there was no geometry, it was a point. Then it has a first idea. Oh, I am infinite space. I am a geometry, a sphere. Then boom, we have a sphere. But you're thinking about the sphere, therefore you've got time. Time and space comes from a point out of consciousness. And this is where Einstein is sort of correct. He's talking about space-time. Yeah, now space-time really means the ether, but it's the most diffuse level of the ether. Just space and time. It's pure geometry. That's it. It's geometry. But geometry requires space and time. You see, the moment you have geometry, you've got infinite different geometries. And because you can draw different geometries, it will take time to draw different geometries. So time is required. Moving geometry is time. This geometry has got to move. That requires time. And we know it has to move because we've got different densities of the ether. So now we can start talking about this. The way it works, pure infinite potential. That potentiality creates a force. Like a battery or like two magnets. There's two positions and they want to pull together, but they're held in suspension. They cannot move. That is a static potential. That creates a force. A force. They want to pull together or they want to push apart, but they are static. So potentiality creates a force. Now when that force is released, that we can call energy. So in a battery, the anode and the cathode are static, apart. But when you put a wire across, you connect the two, you allow the force to release itself. And when the force releases, then we can call that energy. We have energy. So that's how it works within the ether. The ultimate ether works like that, but it works inside the ether. Different potentials are created through different gradients of pressure within the ether. That will create a force. And when that force is released, we have energy. But again, I've said it simpler. The simplest way is just different pressures. Different pressures want to balance out. They want to go back to zero, to rest. And that we can call entropy. Entropy. So energy really is also entropy. It's very difficult. You can also say there's no energy, we've only got entropy. What we create, energy is created, or rather a force is created. It's created by geometry. Again, very simple explanation. I create a battery, I set up this geometry. I create that. That's only a potential. That's not energy, that's nothing. But that potential energy creates a force. It's an imbalance now. An imbalance in the ether. I've created a disturbance. I've moved, I have disturbed the balance of the ether. And it's now locked in position. It's only a potential. That creates a force. And that force is again just static. But if I allow the force to release, now that is entropic. That static potential wants to go back to rest. The 2 points want to come together as one. Geometry is trying to return back to a point. That is entropy. Pure entropy. So we could also say, yeah, there's no energy, there's only entropy. It's another way of saying it. But now I want to take you through, okay, this is going to be radical. The different densities of the ether will have different potentials and will have different manifestations of the force. And they will have slightly different manifestations of energy, which is really just entropy. So the very highest level now, we're talking spiritually, the highest level of ether, which means the most diffuse, lowest density, is thought energy. Thought energy is creating geometry, space and time. That is creating a very abstract potential. It means I create a shape, but that shape now exists in space and time. That is a potential that wants to return back to a point. Again, very deep. Geometry in space and time all wants to return back to no geometry, a point. It's entropic. So we can say the force created by geometry, by space and time itself, that force we can call gravity. Gravity. But remember, it's a static potential created by geometry. 2 points. And these 2 points, again, will have different pressures of the ether. They can be different. Now, we know, in modern science knows, gravity as a force is the weakest force. The weakest one. Very weak. So that's correct. The softest, the weakest energy in the ether is thought energy. So that will be the softest, weakest force. Gravity. Now, don't get me wrong now. Okay, this is where scientists are going to be laughing. I'm not saying that my thoughts create a gravitational force. I'm talking on a primordial level. The moment you have got objective reality, physical objects that are now locked in space, that space has now been permanently created. It's now objective. You see, I've got 2 objects here, 2 different objects. They are locked in space now because of the atoms. But they are different geometries in their own right. And all these geometries want to disappear back to zero, disappear back to the infinitesimal. So they want to collapse inwards. It's the space between the geometries that wants to disappear. Space and time itself is entropic. It wants to disappear back to no space, no time. And once you have objective reality, we can all see it now, it's a real thing. We have real space. Even that real space wants to collapse inwards to a point. So we can call it gravity. And it affects the whole universe. It affects everything. Even light is affected by gravity. Life is affected by gravity. Thoughts are affected by gravity. Our thoughts are pulled down into this material world. The soul is pulled down onto this planet Earth by gravity. Very deep. Same force is spiritual and physical. You can look at it like this. Thoughts are the creation of the ether. And the force of that creation of the ether also creates everything. It creates all densities. It creates material reality, which now creates an objective force called gravity. But it's still the same force. All our souls are pulled by gravity. That's what creates the body. That's why we now are all interacting in the physical world on a physical planet. And yes, it has to be a planet. Everything must be spheres. But gravity is still not what you think. Gravity is the force of thought creating geometry. So Einstein, in this sense, I would agree with. Space-time is gravity. But the force of gravity is manifested by the entropic nature of space-time. Space-time is created by consciousness. And consciousness, once it is created, the ether is created, it wants to collapse back to a point, disappear again. That creates the force. But there are different densities now in the ether. That's the most diffuse. And we know now, after thought, we've got feeling. Feelings. Feelings is more dense ether. We experience that. It's a bit more visceral. Love, hate, anger, ecstasy, fear, all different emotions, courage. And again, ego. Ego is now the creation, the formation of emotional energy in the soul. We have an ego formed. An ego is the way we feel about ourselves. Yeah, I'm really cool. That's your ego. Now, it's different to self-confidence. Self-confidence comes from self-awareness. That's a higher level. Thought, awareness, condenses down into feelings. But that's the next density of ether. So what is the force? What is the force in feelings? This will also create a potential. But again, feelings are dynamic. Different feelings create a force, and feelings, again, are entropic. They all want to come back to rest, peace, balance, harmony, stabilization of feelings, a neutrality of feelings. You could call this contentment, satisfaction, peace, inner peace, serenity. And again, you can call that bliss. They all talk about it in the spiritual traditions. Spiritual ecstasy. Inner bliss. That is consciousness, pure thought energy, highest form coming down into emotional energy. Bliss. Perfectly balanced. But now different pressures appear. You have all different emotions. And they create a force. So we can say that force, we can call that force love. Love. Okay, now we're talking spiritual and physical. Love, however, has also got physical. There's a physical effect to love. The physical effect of love is life, the appearance of biology. That comes from the force of love. But remember, love is still a dynamic. And that dynamic wants to go back to rest. So that's a different force. We experience that force now in living as living beings. So life is, okay, again, life is still the formation of thought. It's both, see, thought energy creates both life and material substance. And it creates all the different densities of the ether work together in this plan. So that's why this is so radical. The first force of thought I've called gravity. The second force, the second level, emotions I've called love. Now we're going to the next level. Emotions condense down. From thought, emotions, the next density of ether we call light. Light. Now light, again, it is both objective and subjective, different densities of light. So the etheric light, emotions, love, condenses down into light. But light, again, is a potential, a potentiality. And light must take place within geometry. And light, again, is a potential and it wants to release. Light wants to go to dark. So light will spread out. It just goes off. Light spreads out radially in all directions. But where is it going? It's going towards dark. Remember, different pressure. Light has a particular density of ether, but within that density, there's different pressures. So darkness is low pressure. Light is a high pressure within that density. So light and dark actually want to disappear. Dark is the empty space. It's empty space-time. Nothing more. It's still geometry. But now, as that geometry collapsing, we can see it as light collapsing into dark. So we can also call that force light. Let's call that force light. But the energy created by that force, we can call heat. Heat. Because heat is a manifest energy. We feel heat. But I'm calling all the energy manifested by light, I'm calling that heat. Again, these are my definitions. So once more, the ether creates a potential. The potential creates a force, and that creates an energy. So the first potential created is geometry. That creates an energy we call thought. Thought. And the force we can call gravity. Second energy, the potential we can call is emotions. We can call that potential love. Love creates that force. But the release of that love we can call, I called it life. But let's call it, we can call that the life force. Chi. That is the chi, love. Chi is the release of the potential of love. Then we can have the next one down, light. Light, again, is created by the potential. It's, again, still geometric, but it's a potential in pressure. So the potential is released as heat. So we can say the force of light, we can call that light. Light creates a force, which is light. And the potential, the release of that potential, the energy created by light, we can call heat. So that's heat. Now light goes down, next level density. The next level density is electricity. Again, I'm defining it. Electricity is a particular density of the ether. Again, all of these are my words, my definitions. You've got to think about this all again. But there will be a way of explaining modern physics as they know it with this model. I'll get there in time. So electricity is the next denser. It's still fluid. You see, light, thought, all those ones are more like gas, more diffuse. But now we get the density of electricity. The ether is now fluid. It's getting more fluid, denser fluid. Chi is still fluid. But that's, again, subtle light, moving to subtle light. Subtle light then moves to electricity, denser. But again, we can call again, it's created by a potential. A static geometry creates an electrostatic potential. So we call the potential energy for electricity, let's call that static electricity. So that's the potential, static electricity. And that creates a force. Again, same name. The force is static electricity, electrostatics. Now the release of that force creates an energy, and that energy is electricity. But now we have reached a certain level of density in the ether. You see, if the fluid is becoming more viscous, thicker and thicker fluid. This is how we visualize it. Light is still not quite viscous, it's more diffuse. As we go to electricity, now it's really becoming like a fluid, viscous. That means now, as a viscous fluid, we're getting a certain amount of elasticity. So now, when at the level of electricity, when energy is created, or when electricity moves, or when we actually create a discharge, this energy called electricity manifests. It's a release of pressure in a viscous fluid. Now, when you release this pressure in a viscous fluid, it also creates turbulence. It creates an effect. So this turbulence in the viscous fluid creates magnetism. It's like, look at it like this. The pressure wave in a jelly. Pressure wave in a jelly creates a sort of slowing motion, a slow motion effect through the jelly. Or it's an elastic band. An elastic band creates a pull. It's got an elasticity to it now. So that has an after effect. The release of an electrostatic potential we call electricity, but that is really, we could also say, electromagnetism. Let's call it electromagnetism. So electricity is electromagnetism because it creates a magnetic field. There's another effect, but that magnetic field is because we are at a particular density of the ether where it is viscous fluid. We're getting to the very dense ether now. So now the density goes lower, higher density. Higher density now, the highest one I've said is plasma. Plasma. But again, plasma is created by this static potential. You need a static electricity will create a plasma. You need a massive voltage across a gas will create a plasma. So that's how I've got tube lights here. Tube lights are a plasma. Voltage applied across a particular gas creates a plasma. But this is low energy plasma. These are secondary plasmas. You've got to be clear here. Once you've got atoms, you can create a plasma, but that is a secondary plasma. I am talking about a primary plasma. This is the primordial plasma before we have got any atoms. So super high energy. This is what I'm talking about, black holes. We're only talking about that level. So after electricity, the density increases to a plasma. So a plasma is now so dense, it's a very viscous fluid. It's now getting more like clay, plasticine. It's got more elasticity, density. So this, again, it behaves in different ways. But it's still fluid, but moving towards more and more elastic fluid. So plasma has got an elasticity. So we can say, again, plasma is created by a potential, a difference in density within that, a difference in pressure within that density. But that the force created, let's call that force elasticity. Elasticity. It's an elastic force. So plasma has got this bounce, a spring to it. An elastic force, of course, wants to spring back. It still always wants to go back to zero, rest. But it's got more elasticity. And now, because it's getting denser and denser, it's more compact, plasma. It has the ability to create these little atoms. But remember, an atom is nothing. It's simply this high dense plasma, and it's a little bubble created in that. It's a little bubble created in that. And the fundamental bubble is going to be hydrogen gas. That will be the densest, most powerful bubble in the ether, because plasma, or super high primordial plasma, is the densest form of the ether. So that will create the primordial atom, hydrogen. And now, of course, you've got atoms. These atoms are now left. They are left in space and time. Space and time is now objective because the atoms are holding it there. The atoms are ether, plasma, locked in suspension in a bubble. But because they are locked in suspension, the distance, the geometry between atoms is also locked in suspension. Space and time has now been made objective. That's it. It's created. Now we have gravity. But now you can understand how gravity operates on objective matter, but it is created by thought. It is created by the metaphysics of geometry. But geometry being thought about, that requires space and time. So, and again now you've got different atoms. You see, if you have an atom, you can have an atom with more electricity in it. If you've got atom with a bit more electricity, remember electricity is thinner than plasma, but electricity is still viscous, very viscous fluid, and electricity has got this magnetic effect. So if you have an atom, again, fundamentally flat plasma, but with electricity again around it, a bit more, slightly more fluid ether, now you have magnetic atoms. The electricity is spinning round and around. That creates a magnetic flux. That creates this magnetic effect. Two poles, a north and a south pole. It's not really two poles, it's the magnetism spinning around a point. It all comes from the middle point, the 0 point. That's the point where geometry is collapsing back. Space-time is disappearing again. So this is far out. I hope I made some sense. And again, just my ideas. These are my words, my terminology, and I am trying to see a simple picture of the entire physical and spiritual universe, and I'm trying to express it in words. So it's not going to be perfect, but I'm doing my best. I really am trying. So thank you so much for your time. Do let me know any questions or comments, and I hope to see you in any of these other videos here.